June 10th, 1990. A Sunday morning. British Airways Flight 5390 climbs away from Birmingham, England, heading for the Spanish coast. 80-some holidaymakers. Breakfast service starting. The captain loosens his shoulder harness, the way captains had done on quiet climbs for decades. 13 minutes into the flight, at 17,000 feet, there is a bang. The windscreen in front of the captain simply leaves the aircraft. The air in the cabin rushes toward the hole, and it takes the captain with it. Tim Lancaster is pulled out of his seat, through the empty window frame, and out of the airplane. A flight attendant grabs hold of him as he goes. For the next 22 minutes, the captain of Flight 5390 is outside his own aircraft, pinned against the fuselage by a wind that struck at more than 300 miles an hour, while inside, everyone who can reach him holds on. This is the story of how he got there. It begins 27 hours earlier in a hangar at night, with a man choosing bolts by eye. 27 hours before the flight, the aircraft, a BAC-111, stood in a maintenance hangar at Birmingham. On the job list, replace the left windscreen. Routine. The kind of task done thousands of times across the industry. The man doing it was the night shift maintenance manager. Experienced, competent, short-staffed. So he decided to do the job himself. Remember that. The manager, working the task alone on a quiet night. The windscreen was held in place by 90 bolts around its frame. And here is the design detail this whole story turns on. On this aircraft, the windscreen was fitted from the outside. On a plug-type window, fitted from inside, cabin pressure pushes the pane harder into its frame. Pressure makes it safer. On this design, cabin pressure pushes the windscreen out, and the only things arguing with it are those 90 bolts. The old bolts came out. The manager took one to the stores to match replacements. The bin he needed was low, the labeling unreliable. So he did what experienced hands in that hangar did. He matched the new bolts to the old one, by eye. Under hangar lighting, at night, without the reading glasses he needed for close work. The official report would record it in one dry clause. He did not use his glasses. The bolts he chose looked identical to the old ones. They were 0.66 of a millimeter too thin, 2/3 of 1 millimeter, the thickness of a fingernail. He fitted 84 of them around the windscreen and torqued each one down without feeling anything wrong, because a bolt that's slightly thin still bites the thread. It just doesn't hold it. Aviation is built on layers of protection. This job fell through every one of them. The old bolts he'd matched against were themselves the wrong part, slightly too short, fitted at an earlier replacement. So the reference he trusted was already off, and matching against it by eye, he reached for bolts that were thinner still. The parts carousel was mislabeled. The manager was the shift's final authority, so he inspected and signed off his own work. And the windscreen wasn't classified as a vital point, so no second pair of eyes was required at all. The aircraft sat on the ground for 27 hours, with that windscreen held by threads that were barely gripping. On the ground, there is no pressure difference across the glass, nothing to test it. Flight 5390 was its first flight since the replacement. The climb out of Birmingham was the first time in those bolts' service life that they were truly loaded. At 17,300 feet, the pressure difference won. The bolt heads pulled through. 90 bolts, one windscreen, gone in a heartbeat. In the cockpit, the decompression fired every loose object forward, toward the hole. The cockpit door tore off its latch and landed across the controls. And Captain Lancaster, harness loosened, went through the window frame to the waist. Flight attendant Nigel Ogden was stepping into the cockpit at that moment with a cup of tea. He dropped it and caught the captain by the belt. Outside, Lancaster's body was slammed back against the top of the fuselage, bent around the window frame, head and torso in a wind blast that hit at more than 300 miles an hour at temperatures far below freezing. The crew inside could see his face through the side windows. They believed they were holding a dead man. They held on anyway, because if the body came loose, it could strike the wing or the engines mounted at the tail. In the right seat, co-pilot Alistair Acheson, who had flown the takeoff, handed control to his captain for the climb, and now took it back with the flight deck in pieces. His first officer's discipline carried the whole flight. Emergency descent. Mayday call he could barely hear over the wind. Get low, where there's air and warmth. Get down, with a door on the console, a crew member hanging out the window, and the checklist for none of it. Ogden's arms gave out. Chief Steward John Heward and flight attendant Simon Rogers took over the grip, holding Lancaster by the ankles. Acheson took a runway he'd never planned. Southampton, short but close. 22 minutes after the windscreen failed, the 111 touched down. And then the detail nobody aboard could believe. Tim Lancaster was alive, frostbitten, fractured, arm, wrist, thumb, but alive. He was flying passengers again within months. Every one of the 80-odd people behind him walked off the aircraft. Investigators recovered bolts from the wreck of the windscreen frame and put them under a microscope. 84 were 0.66 millimeters too thin. A handful of others, marginally too short. None of them had ever been capable of holding that windscreen at altitude. The aircraft had been dispatched into passenger service with a windscreen that was, structurally, resting in place. But the report's real target wasn't one man's eyesight. It was the system around him. A safety-critical task, done solo at night, by the person who then inspected his own work. A stores system where the right part and the wrong part sat a bin apart and looked identical. A design philosophy that let one procedure, matching bolts by sight, defeat a pressurized hull. The manager wasn't a rogue. He was the system, working as it usually worked on the night the odds ran out. The deeper lesson has a name now: maintenance human factors. Fatigue, night shifts, self-certification, normalized shortcuts. After 5390, I've always done it this way, stopped being a defense. The report told the regulator to rethink letting engineers certify their own safety-critical work, and second signatures spread to jobs like this one. The industry began treating the hangar with the same suspicion it had learned to apply to the cockpit. The point of failure on Flight 5390 measures 2/3 of a millimeter. You could not see it. The man who installed it could not feel it. 90 times over, metal threads gripped just enough to pass every check the system actually ran, and not one check the system should have run. Aviation's rules are written in exactly this currency. Small numbers, discovered the hard way. A conversion factor, a rivet line, a bolt diameter. Individually invisible. Collectively, the reason flying is as safe as it is, because every one of them, eventually, got a rule named after it. Every disaster has a point of failure. Find it, and you understand the whole machine. This has been Point of Failure.